Okay, hello again, everyone. Welcome, and I am Bethany Young-Holt, Director of the IMPT. We are a project of CAMI Health, which is housed at the Public Health Institute. I'm joined today by Hannah Rubens, our research assistant, and Vera Zhang, our MBA student intern, who are available to provide tech support. I am delighted that the IMPT is hosting this webinar today in partnership with Matrix, which is the microbicide R&D to advance HIV prevention technologies through responsive innovation and excellence. Matrix is a large USAID-funded project that aims to advance HIV prevention, including MPTs. This webinar will provide a valuable opportunity to hear from MPT and HIV prevention product developers and other experts on topics related to intellectual property and patenting considerations necessary for bringing MPTs and HIV prevention products to market. So we have nearly 120 people registered from across time zones joining us today. So as we wait for others, we invite you to type your name, your affiliation, and where you're located into the chat feature. We also want to note that everyone will be muted during the presentations, and then you can unmute yourselves during the Q&A. If you have any questions for our speakers during their presentations, please use the chat feature and we will address them during the Q&A. For technical issues, you can please chat Hannah and Vera, who are our tech host. Also, the webinar recording and related resources will be available at the impt.org soon after the webinar. So today's discussion will feature presentations by Ian McGowan, our Chief Medical Officer at Orion Biotechnology, Natalia Onluchuk, who is Associate Counsel at the Medicines Patent Pool, and Akash Bakshi, Chief Operating Officer at Your Choice Therapeutics. The facilitated discussion will be moderated by Regina Osi, Chief Global Health Officer at the Aram Institute, and Joe Romano, President of the NWJ Group. So as I mentioned, this webinar is co-hosted by the Initiative for MPTs and the newly launched Matrix program, which is a large USAID-funded program aimed to advance HIV prevention, including MPTs. So Matrix brings together organizations engaged with early-stage research and development on novel HIV prevention products, investigators and partners from the United States and Sub-Saharan Africa, as well as experts in social and behavioral research and market and business case development. The Public Health Institute, where the IMPT is housed, is really pleased to be among the Matrix partners. A component of Matrix is the Business Market Dynamics and Commercialization Hub, which is referred to as BOC. BOC aims to accelerate HIV prevention options by helping product developers refine their commercialization strategies, develop their business case framework and access plans, and foster public health-oriented collaborations among private and public sector resources. BOC recognizes that an understanding of intellectual property and patenting considerations is necessary for bringing MPTs and HIV prevention products to market. The Initiative for MPTs was launched in 2009 as a product-neutral body to foster an enabling environment for the successful advancement of MPTs. Now, I think most of you know that MPTs, or multi-purpose prevention technologies, are products designed to simultaneously address HIV, other STIs, and unintended pregnancy. The MPT field is complex and it involves multiple research disciplines, including the traditionally more siloed fields of HIV, STIs, and contraception. As the central hub for the IMPT over the past decade, CAMI Health has built a product-neutral learning network that brings together these multidisciplinary stakeholders from around the globe around this common goal of advancing MPTs. Since launching the MPT, we have been tracking the MPT pipeline in an online database and have recently completed our annual update of the database. There are currently 25 MPTs in development with active funding. Most of these are in early stages of development, while some are in clinical stages. If you're interested in learning more, you can check out the database at mpts101.org. Also, if you're aware of MPTs that are not reflected here, please do let us know. Also, the IMPT launched the Let's Talk MPTs discussion series to engage experts from diverse disciplines around different priorities and gaps to advance the field. Past topics include regulatory considerations when combining APIs, to toxicity considerations, and integrating end user research into product development. These topics are informed by MPT partners, and as today's topic on patenting and intellectual property considerations overlaps with prioritized technical assistant topics of the Bach Hub of Matrix, we're really happy to be collaborating on this. As with all webinars in the past, these are recorded and housed on the website, theimpt.org, along with other resources, including a newly launched regulatory resources hub. So we are really looking forward to an engaged and lively discussion today, and I'm delighted to welcome now our featured discussants. So Ian McGowan is an academic pharmaceutical executive with extensive preclinical and regulatory drug development experience in oncology, HIV prevention, and vaccines. He is currently the Chief Medical Officer at Orion Biotechnology, where he directs a portfolio of preclinical drug development research. He's also held previous industry positions, including at GSK and Gilead. Natalia Omlachuk is Associate Counsel at the Medicines Patent Pool, where she's worked as a legal counsel on negotiations and drafting of licensing agreements. Natalia has extensive industry and non-for-profit experience, and more recently has been contributing to support R&D for safe and affordable medicines for neglected diseases at the Drug and Neglected Diseases Initiative in Geneva. Akash Bakshi is Chief Operating Officer at Your Choice Therapeutics, where he served since 2018. He also brings extensive technology transfer experience from his time as Assistant Director of Technology Analysis and Marketing at University of California, Berkeley, and as Intellectual Property and Marketing Analyst at UC Davis. Our Q&A discussants and moderators are Regina Osi, who is the Chief Global Health Officer at the Arum Institute in Johannesburg, South Africa. And she has extensive experience in infectious disease and public health. She has previously worked on an array of public health programs in several countries and was previously Director of TB Access at the Clinton Health Initiative. Clinton Health Access Initiative. And Joe Romano is president of the NWJ Group, a biotechnology and pharmaceutical consulting firm that focuses primarily on nonprofit and academic support for drug, device, and diagnostic development. He has extensive experience in pharmaceutical development, including MPT and HIV prevention. So with that, I am again very grateful to our esteemed colleagues who are speaking today, and I would like to hand it over to Ian to hear from him directly. Thank you.
Okay, great. Hopefully you can all hear me and see my screen. So first of all, thank you very much for the invitation, Bethany, to talk today. I think the reason I'm here is because I've had the opportunity to spend time in industry, developing drugs of various types, but also in academia. And in both settings, clearly, intellectual property considerations are very important. And I think my job today is to maybe give you some broad brushstrokes of issues related to this and a few little case studies to illustrate. Oops, let's just get my second slide. There we go. Some case studies just to illustrate where IP and patent issues can impact or be involved in the drug development process. I think it's quite good. I know we have a very large audience today, which is great, and I expect some people will have a lot of knowledge about IP and patents, especially my colleagues on this on the panel, but some people maybe less so, and also some of the more global issues which actually impact the IP patent landscape. So really the three case studies I'm going to present, one is from within academia, when I was at the University of Pittsburgh and was involved with the development of a rectal gel with Maraviroc. And then I'm going to just very briefly talk about IPM and their experience of developing the dapivirine intravaginal ring. And then I'll end up with some recent experience from my current company, Orion Biotechnology. Everything I'm going to be presenting today is in the public domain, so everyone will be relieved to hear that, I'm sure, from the various companies. And any interpretations or opinions I have are really mine, and happy to disagree with others. So let's just start off at the beginning. First and foremost, drug development is both risky and expensive. And why is that important in terms of IP and patents? Well, it underpins the whole process. For people to conduct R&D in drug development, they need to have funds to do that, which usually come from some form of investment. And the degree to which people will be interested in investing really reflects the risk and benefit, but also the protection of the intellectual property that's being used to develop a product. So I'm sure you've seen some iteration of this, this picture before, but you can see if you start off very early in discovery, with perhaps 10,000 compounds, you might only end up with one drug that you actually license. Now, clearly, attrition in the later stages, once you get into the clinic, is significantly less, but it is still significant. And of course, this then means that there's an important consideration for potential investors. The other side of the coin is that, in fact, this whole process is extraordinarily expensive and getting more expensive. And this is some data from the Tufts Center for Drug Development, Damasio. And what you have here really is the estimated cost of developing a drug. Now, this data and this analysis is a little controversial and has been over the years, but I think it's just to give you a ballpark figure. And you may know this data, but the estimated out-of-pocket cost to develop a new product, building in attrition and loss of other products, is probably north of $1.5 billion. That's a lot of money, which I think has, again, implications for investment and protection and the ability to commercialize. So if we go into really a flow chart of the conventional drug development paradigm, it all begins with an idea. And most commonly, the idea probably happens within someone's laboratory in some university somewhere. Of course, it can happen in the research laboratories of a pharma company, but there's an idea. That's step one. If it's a valuable idea, and most universities and certainly companies have a good idea what may have commercial value, there will be a move to apply patent protection to that idea. By doing so, you then create commercial value. And because you have commercial value, you can then attract investment. And that investment allows you to go through the drug development stages you're very familiar with, hopefully to regulatory approval, commercialization, and a return on investment. And that return on investment makes your investors very happy. But of course, when it doesn't happen, they're less happy. Now, you don't always have to wait to the end of the journey to get that return on investment. For companies where the product is licensed out or a company is acquired, that investment, return on investment may happen earlier. But all of these steps along the pathway are critical. So the idea that you basically patent protect your idea so it has commercial value so you can bring in investment. So who pays for research and development? Well, of course, big pharma pays for most of it, and they actually probably pay from their own resources. So just as one example, J&J, probably the world's biggest drug company, their gross revenue last year was actually north of $95 billion US. And their pre-tax income was estimated to be 20 billion. So you can probably imagine where they or how they pay for their drug development and in licensing and acquisitions. Biotech, it's variable. It really depends on how big your biotech is, whether you're in the public sector or private sector. You may have internal funds, but more likely you'll have to raise funds. And that's where IP becomes very important, because if you don't have adequate IP, no one is going to invest in your company. And then you have clinical research and development, which is being done in academia. And that does happen quite a lot. And actually in this field, we're talking about today, MPT, microbicide, HIV prevention, as you'll see in a second, not-for-profit entities, universities, and so forth, very important environments for doing this type of research. And of course, that's mainly funded by grants, and the grants come from the usual groups, including governments, philanthropy, and occasionally, but to a lesser extent, pharmaceutical companies. And each funding relationship will have a unique implication for IP and patent protection, as you'll see from some of the case studies. So I think it's important to remember in the landscape of IP and patents, microbicide and MPT research is very unique. The majority of funding for HIV prevention research comes from US public sector. If you look at this diagram below, which I stole from Mitchell Warren's excellent website at AVAC, it's very clear. Public sector, be it in the US or Europe, provides the lion's share of funding for this. And there's a very minimal amount from commercial entities. Many candidate drugs being evaluated as MPTs are actually recycled from HIV treatment. As you'll see, examples would be tenofovir and dapivirine, which can actually help in terms of controlling costs because a lot of the work may have been done. But the novel agents and combinations, which I and others have explored in the past, they're beginning their journey. So the cost of actually developing them is going to be very high compared to products that have been in the clinic already. Finally, we're living, as they say, in interesting times. As everyone who has a 401k pension in the US has no doubt realized, the markets have collapsed. Many of the biotech stocks are down by 30%. What this means is the opportunity for funding to be brought in from the private sector, venture capital, and so forth is incredibly challenging at the moment. So it's a very sort of hostile environment for anything which doesn't almost guarantee a return on investment. So you can imagine if you wanted to try and raise funds for an MPT in the private sector, you're going to have your work cut out. So moving away from that, let's get back to the university, academic considerations. Just a few things for you to think about. Under the Bayh-Dole Act, universities are allowed to collect royalties on patents that they're able to license out. A portion of the proceeds must be shared with inventors, and the rest must be spent on the institution's scientific research or education. So that's very clear. It's also, and this is of course what universities want to see, there is the potential to generate significant income from licensing out patents which have been developed on IP from their faculty. As one example, in 2005, Emory negotiated the sale of emtricitabine, FTC, it's one of the two drugs in Truvada, and I'm sure you're very familiar with Truvada, for $540 million US. Clearly a very major event for the university, but that's not always the case. And in fact, in the majority of cases, it doesn't happen at all. As one example from the literature, Stanford apparently has disclosed since 1970 almost 10,000 inventions. And of those, only 3 have generated multi-million-dollar licenses. So this is not a topic for today probably, but some have called into question the whole patent process. How useful is it? This is just one example that universities are very, prioritize this, but the return on investment is always not great. However, when it does happen, this is just a quick example of how the funds are divided. So this happens to be from the University of Pittsburgh, where I was for a number of years. It's in the public domain. You can read the whole document if you want to, but you can see where the funds go to. So 45% actually goes to the inventors, the faculty, 7% basically to the department that faculty member resides within, and I won't go through the rest, but you can see how it's all divided up. You don't get it all as an inventor, the university doesn't get it all, but it's divided in a reasonably equitable manner. And of course, it will vary by university to specific numbers. So let's talk about these case studies just to wrap up. So here's the first one, CHARM. This was a U19 grant that I and others were able to have funded from NIH NIAID. Jim Turpin, as he's on the call, was responsible for really looking after this entire program. But it was a very good way to be able to do preclinical and early stage development. So this was $11 million, so not trivial, but clearly a drop in the bucket when you look at some of the numbers I was quoting early. Nevertheless, we were able to conduct 3 phase 1 studies with this limited funding. And I'm just going to talk about CHARM-3 for a minute. So in the CHARM study, CHARM-3 phase 1 study, and if you want to, you can look up the paper, it's published. We had oral Maraviroc, which was provided by ViiV. As you know, Maraviroc is a licensed product owned by ViiV. And the gel formulation provided by IPM, because IPM had obtained a non-exclusive license from ViiV to develop this gel. The study IND was actually therefore held by IPM because that was the main area of interest in the study. Funding came primarily from NIH, but a little bit from ViiV. We had a clinical trials agreement, and again, this is a reflection of academia, perhaps in a way, rather than conventional industry drug development. Curiously, the CTA was held by NIH, IPM, and ViiV, but not Dr. McGowan. So technically, we didn't have a voice at the table, although it was a clinical trials agreement. And nested within that agreement was the IP protection language. So as I mentioned, Maraviroc was licensed, commercial product, topical gel unlicensed. The IP consideration was in the CTA. It was complicated. There were 4 parties involved. In terms of IP, there was NIH, IPM, ViiV, and the University of Pittsburgh. An important feature of this, which allowed the project to move forward, that IPM and ViiV retained the right to the background IP. And this is a common feature of this kind of agreement. And the work that's been done has to be respected and can't be claimed by the investigator working with that product. In addition, there was language telling us that we could not further develop the product and create a new and improved version. However, if along the way IP did arise, then this would have to be negotiated between interested parties. Luckily, that didn't happen. No claims were made, so we didn't have to face that exciting challenge. Now, moving on to IPM, of course, one of the huge successes of this field has been IPM's ability to actually have the vaginal ring approved. This is a good example of a drug that was recycled. Tibertec Verco, who basically invented the drug, evaluated into 200 individuals as an oral agent for HIV treatment. Bioavailability was poor, so in 2003 they abandoned the project and gave IPM a license. Thereafter, the rest, as I say, is history. A series of sequential studies led to a regulatory submission, positive opinions from EMA, and eventually, as we speak, approval by South African Regulatory Authority. And this is all on the IPM website. I encourage you to visit. It's very interesting. But it tells you these are the companies with which IPM was able to negotiate non-exclusive on one exclusive license agreements. And this enabled them to move forward, recycling these drugs into novel formulations and into the clinic. And their focus was primarily in having terms and conditions that allowed these products potentially to be developed for women within developing countries. An important member of this portfolio was clearly the dapivirine ring. As I mentioned earlier, 2004, a non-exclusive royalty-free license, but in 2014, this was expanded to exclusive worldwide rights to dapivirine. So a success story, I would argue, in this field. Finally, just to finish, for profit, Orion Biotechnology, the company I work for, licensed in 5p12 Rantes or OB002 from the Mintaka Foundation in Geneva. We developed a patent portfolio to protect the molecule. We had a legacy history of HIV prevention indication, so we actually agreed to conduct a phase 1 study. We were lucky, we actually were able to get funding from the European Union through Poland, in fact, to pay for the study. And so we conducted the study and it's been written up. As a company, HIV prevention is not really our strategic focus. So we announced recently a collaboration agreement with Evofem, who you're familiar with, I'm sure, Phexxi, licensed commercialized product for pregnancy, to actually collaborate on the development of an MTP product. Obviously, the goal would be to prevent pregnancy, unwanted pregnancy, STIs, and HIV. And again, the way in which we move forward, we obviously had a collaboration agreement. We were both going to respect our background IP, and then we would have a mechanism to deal with future IP that arose out of the project. So this is just another example I've taken from academia, not for profit, and this is for profit. And so this is what we've done. So the conclusions: drug discovery is complex, expensive, and high risk. IP protection is the key to attracting investment. MPT research is by definition for a prevention indication with a demographic that's primarily located in low to middle income settings, 2 factors which will dissuade most companies from entering into this field. So that's a challenge. A product development pathway that does not generate a return on investment also will be a challenge, even with strong IP protection, but it can work. And I think the IPM story with the vaginal ring is an example of where a not-for-profit entity was able to obtain a license, develop the product, and move it into beyond the clinic and actually to patients and individuals who need it. So I'm going to stop there. I've given you a flavor of the landscape, some of the things to think about, and a few case studies. Thanks very much. I'll stop there and give you the screen back.
Ian, thank you so much. That was really fantastic. I know that there are going to be a lot of questions. So what I'd like to ask is if people have questions, if they can hold on to them or put them in the chat, and then Regina and Joe will lead the Q&A. So with that, I think I'm going to hand it over to Natalia.
Hello, everyone. I am very happy to be here with you today. And actually, before we look into the details, I would like to present to you the contents of my presentation today. So I'm going to first briefly discuss what is the medicine patent pool model, what we do, and how we operate, and actually how we are relevant to this webinar at all. And then I would like to focus on some of the MPP licensing terms, which we claim are public health oriented terms. Then we can have a look at some licensing terms that we recently agreed with universities. And here we were going to focus on the licensing terms with the University of Washington, which were negotiated and concluded last year for an HIV product technology. And last point, I would like to present to you is a special wording regarding the Affordable Access Plan, which we're working together with the University of California. So let's dive in. Actually, how MPP is relevant at all to this workshop is because MPP is a patent pool. So we are, as medicine patent pools, so like patent pools in other areas, we bring together the patent rights for certain technologies or products, which we then sublicense to the companies or the entities which would like to develop and commercialize the products. so on one hand, we are a pool. On the other hand, we are also a foundation, a Swiss foundation, founded by United, with a focus on promoting access in the low and middle income countries. As Ian was explaining just before, that this is the area where the investors have a lesser interest, or may have, it might be more difficult to find solutions for these countries. So actually we are working to address this. So if we have a look at how we are working on it, what is actually our bread and butter work. So we take the license from the patent holders. We sign a head license with the patent holders, and then we sub-license the rights that we received to the generic manufacturers, or actually to other entities which would like to develop the product and commercialize it. And that, with the idea that this entity, the objective being that they commercialize the products in low and middle income countries, and like these people who live in these countries can benefit from the product. And actually, what is the advantage of our patent pool in this scenario is that we negotiate on one. There are two aspects. One, that we negotiate the license terms which are in the interest of public health. We claim this, at least. I'm going to explain to you how we think we do it, and also the patent holders, they benefit from, on one hand, they get the royalties. In many of the transactions that we are concluding, there are royalties. Of course, for the low and middle income countries, they remain, or we think they are reasonable royalties, but still the patent holders get certain things in return. And also MPP is useful for the patent holders in this scenario for the license management, because like this, the patent holder doesn't need to expand their team or to invest more time or resources in order to manage the sub-licensees from MPP. So as I mentioned already a couple of times, we think that we are negotiating the license terms which are in the interest not only of the patent holder or the generic manufacturers, but also in the interest of public health. I'm going to discuss this, and actually how I'm going to discuss this is just to take a couple of clauses that we negotiate, which are present in all of our agreements, and in such a way demonstrate to you that that our license terms are public oriented ones, and we can of course discuss, and I am happy to receive any feedback at the end of the presentations today. So the first language that we can have a look at is what we call a non-infringement language. So the language itself, you can see on the screen, and the idea of this specific provision is that the license is usually the rights which are provided in a license are usually provided for a certain territory, and normally there is no right to do any activity outside of the territory. Otherwise, it would be considered as a breach under the license. And but here, thanks to this non-infringement language, as we can see, for example, it says that the licensee should not be prevented to do the activities which would not infringe the patent or non-territory patent granted and enforced in such country. So if we can imagine three different scenarios. One scenario, outside of the territory, there is no patent which was filed at all. It was not in the IP strategy of the originator to file in such a country all in all. So actually our generic company, our sub-licensee, the generic company who took a license from MPP, would still be able to supply in such country the product without being in breach of the of any patent rights, in fact, because there is no patent, and thanks to this, thanks to this non-infringement language. The second scenario would be that if there were patents granted in the given country where the company would like to sell the product, but for example, either the company abandoned its patents because it was no longer in their commercial strategy, or they didn't pay the fees or due to the same reason, or if the patent was successfully opposed and has been invalidated in the court. In such a case as well, our sub-licensee would be able to supply to such country without being in breach under the agreement. And this third scenario is regarding the situation where there is a patent, actually several patents, but let's say to simplify, there is a patent in the country outside of the territory, but in this given country has issued what we call a compulsory license, so a right to benefit from the patented rights, but it is a statutory right which would exist in this country. And thanks to this wording, our generic manufacturer who took a license from MPP would still be able to provide into this country, not being in breach under our license. So we consider that thanks to this important wording, we would allow for the generic manufacturers which take license from us to help increase access in these territories which were not included in the license territory of a particular license. Let's take another example regarding the data exclusivity waiver. So it is also a wording which is included in all of our agreements, or in the vast majority of our agreements. And as we actually, most of you know already in any case that in some countries, not in all countries of the world, but in some countries when the patent expires, there is a data exclusivity period which could preclude the generic manufacturers to enter into the market. And thanks to our wording that you can see here on the screen, for example, here you see that the originator, the patent holder, provides the sub-licensee with the exclusivity waivers so that such sub-licensee could enter the market in given national jurisdiction. And also, as a mirror to this, the licensee in our licenses would also undertake not to seek, or if it exists, to waive any regulatory exclusivity, so that there are less barriers to access a product or technology if there are no more patents in force. The third example I wanted to discuss with you was an important provision in our agreements, and which concerns the improvements. So we call it a grant back clause. It's a grant back because actually the originator granted certain rights to the sub-licensee, and in return to this, if the sub-licensee makes some improvements or makes some discoveries which are relevant to the to the licensed technology, licensed product, then the licensee grants the certain rights, as you can see on the screen: perpetual, worldwide, royalty-free, non-exclusive license for such improvements, so that the originator can also use them. The originator and MPP, in certain cases, would have access to such improvements. And why we think it is this particular solution is positive provision from the public health perspective is because of the language you see in bold, non-exclusive license. It is very important that this license remains non-exclusive, because actually the exclusive license would also preclude the inventor itself to use its own invention, unless it is sole license, but which is a slight difference with the exclusive one. And on the other hand, if it was an exclusive grant-back rights included in your license, such rights would not necessarily mean, but could mean a violation of certain laws. For example, in European Union, it could be seen as a violation of EU technology transfer regulations, and even if it would not be seen as a violation, it could entail a scrutiny on behalf of the European Union, which is not such a, in any case, not such a pleasant experience. In addition to this, under Article 40.1 of the TRIPS agreement, such practice of an exclusive grant-back rights would be seen as practice which could be restrictive to the competition. And indeed, if the inventor, who is the licensee, is precluded from using its own invention, or even it has the right to use its invention, but has no remuneration for its investment that it made into making the invention, then it would. This is what we are trying to avoid in any case. And the last example I wanted to take from our license agreements and share with you is the quality of, relates to the quality of the product. So because we license the products for the commercialization in low and middle income countries, of course, it doesn't mean that the quality of such products should differ from the products which are available in high income countries. So we therefore we require in our licenses, in the interest of public health, so that the products which are sold by our licensees are manufactured in a manner consistent with the WHO verification standards or the standards of the stringent regulatory authority. And stringent regulatory authority is the FDA or EMA or the Japanese regulatory authority, or others, which you can see the list on the website of the ICH. But the idea of this of requiring these quite stringent standards is to ensure the quality which MPP otherwise would not be able to ensure, because we are a Swiss foundation which we don't have necessarily a team of QP people, and in fact it might seem restrictive, but it's very important for ensuring the public health standards in the low and middle income countries. So let's continue now with some of the recent licensing terms we concluded with some universities. So we have three licenses with universities. One is the University of Washington, one is the University of Liverpool, and one with Johns Hopkins University. And I wanted to focus with you today on one deal which was with the University of Washington. Here, I would like to specify that actually all of our licenses are published on the MPP website. They are in public access. You can have a look after our discussion yourself. But all in all, we can see that this was a license for a long-acting formulation using University of Washington drug combination nanoparticle platform technology, and it could be used for drugs combination, either the 3 drugs combination, the TLD, or the 2 drugs combination, tenofovir dolutegravir or lamivudine dolutegravir. And in this case, MPP was playing really a role of a pool, because we have a license for dolutegravir from ViiV and also a license for this technology. So the company who would like to take the licenses for this to continue with this technology can only stop by medicine patent pool and take 2 licenses at the same time. Then, the field for this license was prevention and treatment of HIV. You can see on that it was for the sales in all low and middle income countries. You have the requirement of quality. The license was royalty free, this one, and it was negotiated like this already by the founder of this project, which is Unitaid. And as you can see, also the grant back rights, in accordance with what I just explained before, that it was a non-exclusive grant back clause from our sub-licensees to University of Washington. So in the interest of time, I continue to the next topic, because I think it can be quite interesting for you to hear about. It is a case study on a wording that we developed together with the University of California. So we can start with a little bit of history. In the history, the University of California outlicensed its prostate cancer technology, which Pfizer further developed into enzalutamide, the name of the drug you can see on the screen. And then due to the high prices for this product in low and middle income countries, the university was subject to strong criticism from public interest groups, from the student groups. And in response to this, the University of California started to put the wording you can see on the screen into the license agreements. But the technology transfer office quickly realized that such language, even if it's better than nothing, it had no binding force, and therefore we started to work together with University of California in order to develop a wording which would be, on one hand, not prescriptive, but on the other hand, still would require certain steps. And we can see on the next slide the wording itself, which was developed together with the University of California. And I can take you through some key terms of this wording for the affordable access plan for the low and middle income countries. So the wording requires submission of an affordable access plan within a given number of months. It is negotiable, of course, from FDA or EMA approval. So usually, there could be some justifications why that such plan is not possible or feasible. So different scenarios can be covered here. Then we take in this wording a non-prescriptive approach. It means that we don't define any specific affordable access plan or advocate for any type of solution, for example, licensing to MPP. So it's not a promotion of MPP model, but there is a requirement, for example, to list certain or all actually LMICs in which licensee has no intention of commercializing because it's not in the business strategy, not in their investor strategy, and then this affordable plan would also should also include actually the proposed strategy and the timeline to support access in low and middle income countries within this non-commercialized territory. Once this plan is developed, then there is an obligation of regular meetings so that to discuss the progress and propose some modifications if it's needed. And implementation of the affordable access plan is added to the reporting obligations. So if it is every quarter, then the affordable access plan implementation is also kept an eye on. In fact, in the whole implementation of the project. And the non-confidential version of the affordable access plan can be disclosed by University of California with some interested third parties, as an example. So it could be interesting for any participants of this webinar. And here you can see on this slide some advantages of the affordable access plan. I think what I could highlight here is that the fact that this plan encourages the licensee to think already about different access considerations for the markets for which usually would not be the focus of this company. From the experience that we had and the University of California had with different industry organizations, for the moment, the success plan received a positive feedback, and but this project is still in the piloting phase. So, yeah, I think what we can remember from this project is that there would be communication from the University of California and the MPP and other organizations who adopted this affordable access plan language, so that we could see how it is adopted, how it progressed, and how other organizations implement the IP considerations through this plan in the low and middle income countries. Also, we are trying to convince NIH to use this. To use this practice. And last point I would like to mention to you today is that, and I would like really not this to sound like MPP advertisement, because and MPP could be licensing through MPP could be used by the non-governmental organizations. It could be completely adapted, and we have already 2 sub-licensees which are non-governmental organizations, TB Alliance for Sotezolid, who took a license from us, and Bill and Melinda Gates Medical Research Institute, who took a license from us also for Sotezolid to develop it further. So thank you very much. I apologize for the slight delay and give the floor back to Bethany, please. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Natalia. I think this was such useful and new information for many of us listening to hear about the details of the MPP. And I know there will be many questions. So just a reminder to everyone to please hold on to your questions. And I'd like to now welcome Akash Bakshi. Akash?
Well, hello. Hi, everyone. My name is Akash. I'm the CEO of Your Choice Therapeutics. And I think my co-panelists have kind of hit a lot of the high points. I will try and wrap things up into a beautiful story. So I think everyone here on this call is here predominantly, I mean, I don't think you do work in contraception or HIV prevention or develop MPTs unless your goal is to make meaningful impact. And I think that there's a part of us that may think, why are we here thinking about patenting work if really the goal is to make a positive impact? So perhaps I can try and help and answer that question, or address why it's important to get a patent application in. I think that Ian kind of mentioned this, much of the research funding in contraception or HIV prevention all comes from the NIH. They are the funders that keep us all going, because private industry is perhaps not as interested in either of these indications. And it is a virtuous cycle, as Ian mentioned, right? Which is that research funding comes through from the federal government, results in research, and the end is licensing, and ultimately licensing revenue, which comes back to the institution, ultimately funding more research and bringing about more positive work. 1 second, I don't know why I'm getting this call. Sorry about that. Totally not intentional. And so the point that I would make is it is a virtuous cycle, but And again, the question is, well, why is it important for us to obtain IP rights? And the rationale there is pretty clear in that there's a lot of funding that will go into ultimately taking a product across the finish line. And if there's not some sort of barrier that is put in place that allows whoever has put in much of this capital into commercializing this product or retaining some ability to recoup costs, that it becomes very challenging to justify putting in the millions, if not billions, into commercializing that product. So I will say that the most important thing is to find something that works. If you don't have something that works, all of the further conversations about, getting a patent application is almost a waste of everyone's time because it truly does not matter. But if you found something that works, the truth is that you can work with most patent firms to try and find some way to build up some strategy that can ultimately support you in the commercialization of your product such that you can make a positive impact on the world. That is a broad statement, but it is something that I believe is possible. So I'm not going to go through this in any major detail. If you'd like, you feel free to hit me up. I'm very approachable. So the gold standard, what every traditional pharmaceutical company would love, is if you could deliver them an NCE, a new chemical entity, which would mean that you can patent this molecule and prevent others from using, or selling. This is the gold standard because as long as you have this molecule, others will not be able to use this or reformulate it ultimately to get the same molecule. So this is what you want. Very few people ultimately get this. So what happens next? A lower level of the same idea is potentially you considering, well, maybe I can get a precursor. So if it takes A plus B to give you C, maybe I can protect B, and therefore I will protect C. It's a low level idea, but it's possible. The other is that you say, well, I can patent the process by which you develop analog C. All of these have their own risks and their own falling points, but hey, there are ways to move forward if this is like the coolest thing since sliced bread. Another idea for us to consider, and I think this is particularly important for folks in the microbicide space, is the idea of a formulation patent. Why the work that we do in, perhaps locally delivered products is totally different from folks who do orally systemically bioavailable products is that the product must be formulated differently. In most instances, the same oral pill that you take does not work for vaginal or rectal administration. Or there's some thought process that has gone into place in how to increase bioavailability, or if not needing to increase bioavailability, to increase coverage so that you get local administration the way that you want. This, I think, is where many folks, even if you are repurposing a drug, could consider having thought of a new indication or making an inventive contribution to develop some kind of patent protection that you might get. And the last way that you could potentially consider getting some kind of patent protection is method of use. This, I think, is like the ultimately weakest point, because all you're saying is that, no one had ever thought of a drug in contraception or as an IMPT, and you have. The issue is, how are you going to enforce someone going after people and saying, hey, I patented this, you're not doing this properly. This is a broad overview. If there are questions on any of this, happy to go into more detail. But I also wanted to make a point about why I think formulations are particularly interesting, especially for IMPTs or for products that are administered vaginally or rectally. and as many of you know, the amount of hormones, for example, that are eluted from NuvaRing are significantly lower than the amount of hormones that are traditionally made available through oral administration. And this is in fact true for almost the fact that there's a lower amount of drug that becomes systemically bioavailable is traditionally true for most products that are administered vaginally. And it is because it is thought that because they are acting locally, that you don't actually need as much drug systemically bioavailable. And the benefit here is that if you do develop a new formulation, go for a new route of administration. These are two ways that you can protect your MPT that you've developed. But the other is that you've actually made it now more challenging for someone else who wants to come along and do the same thing that you've done, because bioequivalence, which is traditionally what is done for generics of orally bioavailable drugs, becomes far more challenging because you have to actually continue to show that the formulation that you've developed is actually functional and is actually making the same change, and that, you know, looking for how much of the drug is available systemically is actually irrelevant. And so I think that this is something that is important to consider as you are developing a product, is that you actually may have other ways to protect yourself and protect yourself from other infringers. And in fact, the path forward for other people who may be trying to copy your work once you've made meaningful change may also be more challenging as well. I will go into how I think a 505(b)(2) can actually decrease the costs of developing a product. This is to say that when you're repurposing a drug, again, you don't have much of the patent protection that is associated with a new chemical entity. But that trade-off is that you could have a far faster path into the clinic. But that being said, that is, I think we should think about the first part of what I said as, you know, you need to find something that worked. Then you can think about, how do you protect that work? Was it an NCE? Was it not? And then the last thing is, you know, how does that license agreement come into play? And, you know, I think that many of the most important works that are being commercialized to date all come out of research institutions traditionally funded by the NIH. And so I think it's important for you to realize what kind of agreements there are to allow you to potentially commercialize this work. And I think the major outlines are a letter of intent, an option agreement, or a license agreement, each of which plays a role at different parts of where you are in your development. So, you know, let's say you're thinking about starting your own company, spinning this out and moving this forward yourself. You could get a letter of intent, and this allows you to secure access to the IP and prevents others from being able to commercialize this work. But it doesn't allow you to actually do any work on this, or doesn't provide you the rights to actually conduct research on this work. That's what the option agreement is for. It not only allows you to secure access to the IP, but allows you to use it and test out and see whether it works or not in different settings. And finally, what the letter and the option agreements are supposed to allow you to feel more comfortable doing is getting a license agreement, either exclusive or non-exclusive. You know, as I was developing the slide, I was thinking in my head, is there an example where I could think of for a therapeutic where a non-exclusive license might make sense? I can't necessarily think of one, though the indication of a non-exclusive license, I think in my head makes a lot more sense if you were to develop a diagnostic or something like that. And so as you're thinking about these license agreements, I think it's important for you to consider, you know, what is the university trying to capitalize on, or what are they motivated by? Because, you know, I would say that since, like Ian said, most license agreements don't result in meaningful income. And so the university, more than anything else, is looking for a reputational gain. I think far less so than gaining capital back. I think they're thinking about, you know, how do we get a reputational gain from having been the birthplace of a particular technology? The university is also interested in protecting base IP because, you know, you never know what the original invention was and what its ultimate use case will be. Um, and for that reason, what the university is looking for in a licensee is a team who would be in the best position to commercialize these findings. And in most instances, that's someone from the lab who's able to understand what the work is and figure out how to further commercialize this work. And ultimately, the reason why I keep saying commercialize the work is that the university is incentivized by someone who's ultimately able to commercialize the work. You know, BIDOL was put into place because the NIH was not necessarily in the best position to commercialize all of the research that they had originally funded. And so if at the university level, if they're able to find individuals who are able to commercialize this work, this is where I think the university is most incentivized. The hope is that through IP licensing, that there's further research and innovation that takes place, and then hopefully more in the local community, that there are more high-tech jobs that are created. So I will briefly summarize what I think I tried to explain is, you know, let's say you have an invention, how can we figure out how to protect that work? Okay, if we've protected that work, you know, how do we gain an access to the IP? Or what kind of ways can we license that IP? And if you are in the position where you have to negotiate a license with the university, what is important for you to keep in mind if you need to ultimately license that IP? The last point that I would want to go to is where I think many people in the contraceptive and IMPT world, the MPT world are in, which is what happens if you have a repurposed drug where you have weak claims, but still you can make meaningful impact. And it is here that I think about the 505(b)(2). I will say I have recently spent some time commercializing a product using a 505(b)(2). And all a 505(b)(2) means is that you're taking a drug that has otherwise been approved and are getting it reapproved for a new indication. What's really attractive about this is that whoever had to move forward with the original indication had to move forward and do extensive safety studies, which then, and if approved, that means the FDA has agreed to the safety data that was there. What you get to do if you're repurposing a drug is state that, oh, okay, I see your safety data. I would like to lay claim to that as I move forward and commercialize my product. And so this can significantly decrease your costs as you consider commercializing a product. And it comes with a 3-year period of exclusivity. And so what I think is important here is that you know, the pediatric exclusivity might not necessarily be very interesting in the contraceptive field, but it does also exist. But the 3-year exclusivity is important because this is a protection provided to you by the FDA in that they will prevent others from being able to get a registered product for the same indication, which is great protection for you, the researcher who is likely commercializing this work. I've made this point that if you're repurposing a drug through vaginal administration or through rectal administration, you might get significantly lower drug that is systemically bioavailable. which means that bioequivalence may not be sufficient for a competitor to come onto the market. And that means that whoever ultimately wants to re-enter the space that you've kind of paved the path forward for would have to put in considerable costs in order to do so, which could be additional protection for you as you're commercializing the product. And I think more importantly, these are points that you can use to whoever is funding the work, the commercial partner who's funding the work, to give them some kind of ease of mind that there's a path forward here. And with that, I am done. Hopefully that made sense. And if you have any questions, please let me know.
So much, and thank you to all the presenters for this really informative session. I think that I've definitely learned quite a lot. And so we really welcome questions through the chat. There are some instructions online about on the screen right now about the questions. You submit them to the chat. You should unmute, announce your name and affiliation, and you can also raise your hand, I think, if you want to. While people are getting ready to ask their questions, and I'm just going to load my chat screen here so that I can see them. I can go ahead and start asking one question that we had. Unfortunately, Joe Romano had some issues with Wi-Fi, so he had to leave early. So one question that he actually sent me, which I think is actually really important, is to ask Akash specifically, if you can take a minute to explain the distinction between patent protection versus trade secrets in terms of potential information or protected information as opposed to what is publicly available. I think that that's something that people tend to ask, and then I'll have some further follow-up questions as well for you, as well as for Natalia and the other presenters.
Yeah, so it's a great question. So there are various ways that you can protect your idea. Patent applications are a great way to do this. The downside is that it provides only 20 years of exclusivity. It's why Coca-Cola is still around, is that they never disclose any of their work, and it's a great trade secret. That being said, there is so much of the work that has to be done that has to be so openly disclosed to the FDA through the regulatory process that I think trade secrets are particularly challenging. And further, I think that there's a risk as we consider building trust with the public with maintaining some ideas as a trade secret. That being said, it is not that trade secrets don't exist within the therapeutic space. In fact, much of the work that goes into formulating a lot of products are not fully disclosed in patent applications. And in fact, there are frequently trade secrets in process development that exist. And that is mainly there to prevent generic manufacturers from being able to take over as new formulations are developed. I don't know if any of my co-panelists or if anyone else has anything else to say on the topic or vehemently disagrees with what I'm saying.
Any
No, I
comments?
agree, Akash.
Thanks. And then another question we had was, you talked about the motivations of the universities and others for sort of filing for patents and different things. And I think that in the work that we're doing at Matrix, we have various diversity of types of product developers. And we're wondering if you could explain a little bit more how the motivations for universities differ from that from an NGO or for-profit company in terms of, you know, the patent and IP.
So, you know, that's a great question. I can't comment about NGOs, but what I would say is that the university is incentivized to file a patent application regardless of what they think the potential commercial upside for that product is, irregardless. So if we think about motivations there, you know, the product could make very little money. The university is still incentivized to provide some kind of IP protection for an idea, because it is in the best interest of the university to try and commercialize any research that was done there. And that, I think, is significantly different from how a for-profit organization would work, which would ultimately say, like, hey, if it's going to cost us millions of dollars to protect this IP globally, is it really worth it if the market is not $1 million? So I think that that's one clear way that a university and a for-profit organization would think differently. I also think the stage at which a university is willing to file IP versus a for-profit organization would be willing to file IP is also totally different. I mean, if we were to take I will say that I worked at UC Berkeley for some period of time, that if we think about just the base IP of the CRISPR patent application, I think it's hard. I think it's now 10 years since the original paper came out in Science. I think it's hard pressed that anyone thought when that first invention disclosure came in that we would see the world that we're living in today. And so I guess I would think that the university has a far more broad-minded view of protecting IP, especially since much of this work is so foundational and can bring about so much meaningful change.
But Akash, can maybe I just challenge you a bit? I mean,
Yeah.
You know that maintenance of IP is a significant expense whoever it's being maintained by. And certainly I've had experience, not such myself personally, but with colleagues in academia and the university said, we've only got a limited budget. There's a limit to the budget we can use to maintain and prosecute patents, and you're out of luck. So it's not inexhaustible. They must have to make choices, decisions. I mean, I like the idea that you put forward that it's both potentially commercial, but perhaps more importantly, reputational, but still there must be a limit as to how much they're prepared to do.
That's true.
Actually, I can add something to this as well, because yes, it is really a strategy. Where do you patent? If you only patent in the United States, you preclude only the commercial, the sale in the United States. But if the market for a given drug is not so big in the States, then what I see actually from my day-to-day work is that the patent originators, patent holders, sorry, the technology originators, so they would patent in the countries where there is manufacturing capacity. So they would patent in India and China, in 20 countries where there is manufacturing capacity, and like this they already limit a lot the expense on the patents and the risk that that other players would come into the market.
Thanks, that's very useful. Yeah, go ahead, sorry.
Sorry, it's a fair comment. I was just going to build on what Ian said, and my view here is, like, I don't think that universities are going to say we're going to file a PCT and prosecute in every country or every jurisdiction, but their view would be that to at least maintain some jurisdiction and keep a jurisdiction alive and continue to prosecute, because you never know how the world might change.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. Another question that I also had actually was around some of the issues that we're doing with the work we're also doing in HIV prevention. And this is more for Natalia, around the issue of if you have multiple parties that are potentially interested in the same API drug, for example, for HIV prevention, but have different formulation and delivery technologies. Does the MPP then look for independent licenses to individual interested parties, or would they allow for research exemption so that different groups can work with the same drug in different ways? I mean, how is that handled in terms of one type of API, but different formulation and delivery technology?
Well, I think there are two questions in this question. So one, of course, there is a research exemption in the country where the potential licensees operate, then they can just carry on under the research exemption. They don't need the license from MPP, but we can play a role, and usually companies turn to us if they know they would like to commercialize this product, not only research. So they are the commercial entities, and if we have a license for different products, which could in the end, like for different technologies to different products, which could at the end be only one deliverable, then we can pull these technologies together and be like a one-stop shop for the company who would like to bring a final product to the market.
Okay, any comments on that from the other panelists? Just generally?
I mean, I think one consideration is, you know, we mentioned earlier that a lot of this activity is funded through NIH, Bill and Melinda Gates, USAID, et cetera, and being conducted to a large extent by not-for-profit entities or academic centers who may not have the capacity or interest in commercializing, moving, you know, taking on the responsibility of taking it through to the finishing line, or the resources to do that. So often, you know, we'll do it through a clinical trial agreement or a materials transfer agreement or something, just so we have the product and we can do something with it for a period. And that's one of the challenges. You know, I mean, a lot of people have dabbled with tenofovir. Gosh, how many people on this call have had a finger in the tenofovir pie? You know, different formulations, different indicate, whatever. But I don't think many people will have, well, there's probably two exceptions, IPM, I guess, and maybe Conrad have had a license, but most people haven't. Of course, it's now generic, so it's moot. But I think there is a difference. I mean, I think, you know, it's one thing about a license with a view to head towards the end game, or just being part of the, you know, research efforts around that product. But that's a challenge of the field, which I think distinguishes MPT, microbial research, from almost anything else. It's very fragmented quite often. I mean, IPM is a notable exception, but many of us have you know, played in this sandbox.
Yeah, no, that's true. So another question from Shannon in the chat is a question about a modification to an API. So if a small modification is made to an API, for example, to make it more potent or to make it longer acting, how does the organization then proceed with patent negotiations in this case? Like if it's just an incremental sort of change to an existing API.
You should talk to a patent attorney. You should talk to a patent attorney, because you should not decide. Also, you know, small is in the eyes of the beholder. And so I would say you don't know what is small and how insignificant that is. But in fact, if you could have potentially made an NCE out of an otherwise known molecule. And so I would talk to a patent attorney.
No, I mean, absolutely. I mean, honestly, one change in a molecule can completely change the molecule. And as Akash is saying, it's a new NCE. So there's no such thing as a small modification. You may have a modification which does nothing, but it's still a different molecule. But quite often just a single amino acid substitution or a different hydroxyl group, it's a different molecule, behaves differently.
Okay, great. And so I don't see any other questions in the chat, so maybe I'll go back to one of my own. I think that, you know, working in the global south or in a developing country, we always are, you know, thinking about access as the forefront of sort of when we look at new products coming down the pipeline. And I'm wondering, maybe this is a question for Ian or anyone else of the panelists, how do we best balance, you know, as a global community, the need for return on investments from the development process, but also thinking about access upfront? Because I think that with Matrix, for example, is a good example of that, where access is really an important consideration, but that's not always the case. And how, you know, when is the right time to start thinking about, you know, having actually people who can afford an affordable product for the millions of people who might need it in the setting of MPT, for example, because actually the market sometimes for some of these products is relatively small in the originator country, but the larger market is in places or parts of the globe where people really cannot afford potentially, a certain price for a product. And so I'm just wondering what is the best way to structure work so that those access considerations are taken account for and sort of early on in the process.
Well, I mean, I think again, it really depends who's driving the process. And here again, IPM stands out as the exemplar of a not-for-profit entity who have a very well-developed business plan, who had a very clear access program, and who had critically a big donor base that made the whole operation feasible. So they could have that discussion. The time in which I was part of this discussion would be when I was at Pittsburgh and we were working and placing studies in sub-Saharan countries such as South Africa, and to get regulatory approval, as you know, to conduct this type of study because of concerns about what in the old days we used to call parachute research. The regulators wanted a commitment from the company that if the product did indeed become commercially available, that it would be provided in country. So there was a linkage to access built-in regulatory approval. Now, clearly, if you're going in a phase 1 study, that's so far from the finishing line, it's very hard to manage that. But if you're doing a phase 3 program, it becomes a real issue. And then, obviously, clearly, groups like IPM had a plan to basically make the drug available post licensure, and that was all built into it. But I think one of the problems is a lot of us or a lot of groups will do much earlier stage, and that can be a reason why you can't place a study in certain countries because of the restrictions upon access. And it's very hard to consider an access discussion when you're in phase 1 because the attrition rate is so significant, you may never make it to that level.
Mm-hmm. Any other comments from the panelists on that particular point?
I actually would like to add that in such a scenario that you described, where the markets are not so huge, but could exist in many countries, for example, on the African continent for certain HIV drugs, for example, or technologies, one good model that I observed at Drugs for Neglected Diseases initiative would be, of course, to have not from the very beginning, but quite early on, to have a commercialization partner, and this commercialization partner could be either a pharmaceutical company, a big pharmaceutical company, or a generic company, but who has necessarily a very good network of supply. So like local affiliates, local presence, they know how to work in these countries, because otherwise if you work with companies who are very local, then you don't have the network to reach the patients, in fact. So investing in in developing a true relationship with a commercialization partner is really an asset.
No, that's an important point. All right, so if we don't have any further comments, I think we're getting to the end of the hour for the webinar. I'm going to hand over back to Bethany for her closing remarks. Thanks everyone for the discussion.
Hi everyone. Thank you so much to our amazing speakers, Ian, Natalia, and Akash, for your great presentations. Learned so much. And Regina, thank you very much for facilitating. I think this was a really great learning experience. So just in closing, I also want to thank NICHD, USAID, and Matrix for supporting this, and the Bach Hub. The webinar will be recorded, or it has been recorded. It'll be posted on the IMPT website, and on the homepage you can go to learning events, and soon you should be able to find it on the new up-and-coming Matrix website. If you have any comments, questions, please reach out to us. And yeah, thank you all. Have a great rest of your day.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.